we're actually, yes, I prefer to think we're constructivists, but we're structuralist constructivists or constructive structuralists or deconstructing structuralistic something like that. That what we fundamentally say is that the form is influencing the content. That the relationship, that you get more leverage when you shift the form than going after the content. So simplest example is someone's feeling phobic, and going back to the beginning of the whole thing, that you learn in Practitioner this means of helping the person to step out of the experience and to see themselves and therefore not be phobic because it's not happening to them. Because if it was happening to somebody else across the street, you could feel badly about that, but you wouldn't be panicked by it the way you are if you're in it. Now, going back in a moment, that there are other forms of therapy which are based, curiously enough, on other forms of, we always say based on NLP because they found it on their own. Implosion therapy. Implosion therapy is where you give such an overwhelming amount of input that the person can't handle it anymore, and then they can't have the fear. Threshold patterns, exactly. Submodalities. So blowout, right, exactly. So you see the Indiana Jones film part, where he looks down into the temple and goes, snakes. I hate snakes. But by the time he's done that whole thing, he's over his fear of snakes. Because there just was so many snakes, which I was wondering if Steven Spielberg was trying to do something with his viewers along that line. I wonder about these things. I have extra room. And so there are therapies, though, where first of all you see the snake or the dog from far away, and then closer, or then more of them, and so on, while remaining associated to try and somehow decondition is the theory. Whereas we have a different theory. Ours is representational. Ours is also constructivist. Structuralist. Structuralist in the sense that if you change the structure of the experience, if you change the scope, that is, the scope of it was that you were associated, but now you've moved back the scope and you can see yourself, and there's you and this snake or whatever, and you're now in an observer position, metaprogram shift, then you're not phobic anymore. And your brain reorganizes that, and then you're in a situation where you're thinking, oh, well, when you go back in, if something should come up, your brain automatically has learned, do it a different way. This is to suggest something a little ahead of the game, which is you might consider in the back of your mind as we do things that all of the change patterns of NLP are based on metaprogram shifts. Just to suggest something. You might consider thinking about it that way. In the meantime, there's a phrase for which I am known and I must now act upon. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. It's time to practice. Yes, we have a lot of theory, and I wanted you to have that because I wanted you to be sensitive to what you were going into. Now comes the point we need to practice this stuff. And in terms of practicing this stuff, what we want to do is pick one of the strategies and begin to find out what are the metaprograms that are more foregrounded for that particular strategy than for another. That's what we're going for. Remember, all the metaprograms are there, and maybe one of them will be more important that I haven't listed, but I'm saying these are the ones to check out first. So turn in your manual to the page that is entitled Decision Strategy Metaprograms. Thank you. And the very first one you see there is content, which would make sense because we make decisions about content. We make decisions about the people in our lives. We make decisions to buy or not buy something. We make decisions about where we want to go. We make decisions about what we want to do. We make decisions about whether or not we have enough time to do all those things or not do them. So, of course, the first kind of area to go to would be that you're making decisions based on the content. And we've already been over that in a basic way. First elicitation, then applications, then change processes. So we've been doing a whole lot to get your awarenesses ready for elicitation. We've already been over the content meta program. Are there questions about that? Yes, Ron.
I guess as far as time is concerned, it would be time in the future, wouldn't it? It wouldn't have anything as far as decisions are concerned. You wouldn't be looking at past, present, or future. You'd be looking at the future as it is.
No, actually, again, if you were making a decision about how much time you had to do it, you'd probably reference how much time it took last time. Now, time is not typically listed in the content meta program because time is involved in all of them, right? You have to have time to do any of the other contents, even if it's like sit and meditate in a place. So generally, we don't mention time, but I do because in the interest of completeness. But to answer your question, yeah, if you were going, do I have enough time to do this? You'd go back to the last time you did it and then project it forward. And if you didn't know, you'd have to estimate somehow.
Well, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Come up with a rough idea.
Yeah.
So you're really talking about amounts of time.
Amounts of time. There might be the person's relationship to time. That can also happen, though it tends to be with more people meditative or physicists. The next one listed here is quite simply the perceptual positions. Please keep in mind that you understand these learnings through your own meta programs. When this was first brought up about perceptual positions, I couldn't understand what it was about. Of course people made their own decisions. Who else would make them? And the people I hang around with, that was the case. And then I got a job consulting to a firm that met people and tried to place them in jobs and slots. And I met people, and I mean people with some seniority. And we'd be sitting there in the interview talking about a possible job prospect, a possible connection, and going over the possibilities, because I was brought in to actually apply the meta programs to their interview process, to their process of vetting people and making good matches. Because if you could make a better match, then the company would make more money, be more highly considered, higher value, better results, people feel better. So this was my role as a consultant. But I was sitting in on the sessions, of course, to get a feel for what it was like, what kind of questions to ask, so forth. And so the person turns to me and says, so what do you think I should do? And I pull out my paper again, and I said, well, there's these advantages and disadvantages. This seems to match your criteria in this ways, not in those. You know, overall, it seems like it works pretty well for you. You know, I think that you can make a decision here. A few moments would pass, look up, shake their head and go, what do you think I should do? And I sat there, and it was one of those moments I went, oh my, there really is this other position that the person really was in other. They were asking me to make this decision. And later on, I'd encounter this in a training program where I would meet people who didn't do the shopping, didn't buy their own clothes, had not even decided how many kids they had. Yeah. So, and if you think about it, it actually makes sense, is that we all start out very other. I mean, yes, there's a lot of self you can see in that little baby there, but they're all kind of looking out on, what's going on in the world. So this is more than you might think it would be. You may find in all of your cases, yeah, it's me. You want to consider that outside of this room of self-selected self-starters who came here at your own interest and your own money, there might be other ways to do that. You might occupy a different position. The next one on the list is attention direction. Now, this is a little more subtlety on the perceptual positions. Sometimes having an external way of displaying this makes it easier to understand. So I brought one along. Who we are and how we relate to other people is so important that we make multiple levels of distinctions about that. And they are so fundamental to us, both biologically and linguistically, that we consider them metaprograms. So when we're talking about the perceptual positions, another way to speak about that is it's where you are. Are you having the feelings in yourself, as I've suggested? Or the golf example I gave, am I having the feelings as much as I can, imagining I am the golfer? Imagining you are a Tiger Woods, or imagining you are a certain CEO or public figure. That to be the observer is as much as possible to be observing yourself, with others perhaps, by yourself, whatever way you do it, but being in that sense dissociated. Now, I haven't used that term this whole time because if you're dissociated from one place, you're associated to another. Does that make sense? People tend to use the word associated to be present. So if you hear that, that's typically how they use it. Typically, people mean dissociated to mean observer. There's even a school of NLP that has to count these. So this is first position, second position is other, third position is observer. I don't like the numbers. There's implications. The implications being, for example, that first position is most important because it's first, it's one, right. And actually, I think there's some truth to that, but if you just stay there all the time, it can get pretty lonely. And you don't get a perspective on things. And you don't appreciate, in some way, the love other people hold for you that you get if you really kind of step into that. In other words, there's so many learnings in the other roles that Leslie Cameron Bandler was the one that brought it up with names, and I like that. Let's use the names. Now, your body is in one of these, or maybe it's a mixed state. That's very often the case with people. They're kind of in the experience, they're kind of observing of themselves a little bit. But whatever way they do that, you then have an attention direction. In other words, I can be totally in my own body, Jim, paying attention to you, which is other. Or I can totally be in my own experience, and I can be thinking about the future. My attention can be to the future in an abstract way, or perhaps a you and I in the future. My attention, therefore, can go both in perceptual position and through time. My attention can be on me. I can be in my own body. I can attend to myself. What are you looking at? Now, when I said, what are you looking at, where was my attention? On other. Where was my body? In self. Does that make sense? You can see how the mat helps here and sort out the two differences, that one is where you are, and the other is where your attention's going. Well, this is pretty important for decision making. Yeah, because the person, if we're trying to make, say, a group decision, and I'm in my own body, which is a good place to make a decision, because then I'm going to get good kinesthetic results, and my attention is on myself, and it's a group decision, yeah, how good is that decision going to be, right? So I said that's why I foregrounded these particular metaprograms as important in the process of decision making. You can't not use them. And the question is, how to use them? Do you use them well? Do they serve your outcomes? The next one on your sheet there is the time frame. Yes?
One point in terms of the perceptual position.
Mm-hmm.
Some guys consider there is a fourth position, however, we. Is it important in terms of leader programs?
There's...
No, it's not an other, but we position.
Okay, let's back up then. We'll go back up all the way to the perceptual positions. And I agree it can be important, that's why we're doing this. So in the accepted literature, you have the self, the other, and the observer, right? I'm even going to give you something more right now. Because I don't know how this got lost, but it's been coming back, and I'm one of the people making it come back, is that you can step into other and still be yourself inside. Or you can leave yourself behind and take on as much of other as you can. Do you understand this is different? My good friend Al, he explains this so well because he's a neighbor. And the neighbors realize that Al gives good advice. So the neighbor comes over to Al and says, Al, if you were me, what would you do? And then blah, 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 blah. And the guy talks and talks and talks. Gets to the end and looks to Al, and Al goes, I do what you do. And the guy goes, no. Al, if you were me, what would you do about this? And Al says, I do what you do. Yeah? Because if we were totally that guy in that situation, but what that guy was asking for, Al, if you were to step in for me, what different decision would you make? And that's the difference between switch and shift. If you switch perceptual positions, you leave as much of yourself behind as you can, which of course you can't because it's your neurology. But you go, okay, I'm going to, as much as possible, step in and mold my body and my thoughts and my words to the person I'm stepping into. I'm switching perceptual positions. Versus if I were to take myself and have the mask of Al on, and inside I'm still holding my thoughts and everything else, and I look over at Charles going, hey, pretty good looking guy. So, in other words, I'm just doing what I'm doing. That's a shift. I shifted myself over. I didn't actually switch. It's a switch. Yeah, in modeling, you want to switch as much as possible. In fact, when I'm doing modeling work, I will actually, in a sense, take off submodalities that I have for something and try on the submodalities of the person I'm modeling for that instance or situation. That's one of the ways that it helps me to switch. Well, you're always going to be yourself. That's what I'm saying. But underneath that, you can make a commitment to putting yourself as much aside as you can. And watch this again. Putting yourself as much aside, it's right there in the language, as you can. And then taking on by posture, by talking the same way the person does, by gesturing the same way that they do, switching to their perceptual position, really going into other as much as you can. And if you do, we know from the rep systems, representational systems, that if you lift your head up, you're going to visualize more. If you talk fast, you're going to visualize more. And if you lean over this way, you're going to talk, and it's going to drop down into your auditory. You're going to talk to yourself. Versus if you're visualizing and you're putting your weight more on this leg, then it's going to drop more down into your kinesthetics. Some of you are looking at me like you don't know this. All right. This will be in the advanced strategy section. All right? That the very way you have your physiology organized, you're creating what are called synesthesia patterns. And when you create that pattern, it's like tuning an instrument in a certain way, so it's more likely to make certain sounds. So, same thing, when you do that kind of thing, you're actually switching over when you take the posture of the person you want to model. When you take the rhythm of the person you want to model versus your own rhythm. Now, eventually, if you do that enough, it can become your rhythm too. We expand what we're capable of without gaining weight. Sort of important on that last part. Yeah. So, we've got when you're in yourself, you're referencing yourself. We've got where you could take yourself over, which is a shift. And we've got where you can switch and become the other person. Yeah? And then, at least for people with the skill of Leslie Cameron Bandler, there was simultaneous. They could go back and forth fairly quickly. I see less of that, but yeah, I think obviously she thought people could do it. She listed it as one of the ways it could be done. So, Michael, yes, Paul.
Yes, okay. I usually associate other with a switch.
Good.
Okay.
I think it's the most productive way to do it.
Okay. And my question at this point, though, is that what makes a shift different than observer?
Yeah, Paul. The brain is turning back there. Right, the idea here being that Who's an observer? You step out and you're an observer. Who are you? You're you observing. Yeah, right. So Paul suggests, well, what if you just shift over here, then you're basically being an observer from this particular person's point of view. Yeah. So in that sense, you're holding the scope constant. Whereas if you were to observe the whole situation, you've got to widen the scope enough to take in both of you. And you're not making the mistake of thinking that your friend, your companion, your colleague, your coworker actually thinks what you think. Because you step over here and go, you're still wrong. Then you didn't really, right, you didn't learn anything. So there's an importance about sorting out that difference. Now, Michael, to your question, it's a matter of the bounding conditions. Now, that's a very fancy word to say that people concern themselves about themselves, right? But you get into a couple and you negotiate, and then after a while it's automatic, and when you go to make a decision, you might be thinking, how's my spouse going to think about this? You don't even need to ask them, right? You've got representations. You've made a model, and you've tested it enough, right? That you go to we, and somebody invites you to a party, and you know they don't mean you. They mean you and your companion, and it's a we. Yeah, of course. I mean, and it's in the language. It's not as if it's a new thing. It's right there. In the same way that you might treat a couple as a system that you go meet. Whether that couple is another couple at a dinner party or whether that couple's across a negotiating table. Whether those other people on the other side of a team you're playing against. That how you bound the system is what this is about systems and how multiple people create resources for each other. And often this is couples, at least we hope that when we get together in couples, that we will be more than the sum of our two parts of it. So certainly. Yes. In this case, for the sake of learning, we restricted ourselves to self-other observer. Clearly, you can easily pop it up to the larger system, self-other, we are making a decision to buy a house or something like that. Yeah.
And with a couple of times, if you are not in the first position, in the original first position, and not in the second, they say always we. When we agree, so that's for me kind of in-between thing, in between I and you. That was the reason for my question.
Well, in Michigan, we have a phrase, when somebody says we go, what, you got frog in your pocket? We found out later that this was a hidden meta-model question. I say hidden because we're really trying to find out if there is a we. Like the person goes, are we going now? And then I go, what, you got a frog in your pocket? In other words, who are you describing as, maybe it wasn't all that polite, but it's who are you describing as the we? Is it an abstract we? Is it an actual we? Is it an informed we? In other words, is it we, this company, which the person holds amorphously, or is it we, my partner and I, whom I know well and know her criteria, want to make this plan? And that's, of course, again, more information. Yeah.
We say we, meaning I.
Well, that's why I asked, you got a frog in your pocket? You go, no. And I go, okay. So it's the royal we.
Yeah.
All right, time frame. The time frame in which the decision is made. Is this a decision about the present? Is this decision really a recapitulation of the past? Is this decision some way projected forward into the future? How does the person think about deciding? We already know that it worked in the past. So somebody might be talking about making a decision with certain people, perceptual, because it's worked before. We're going to do it this way. Where somebody else might go, well, we're facing a situation, never been like this before. Of course, that brings up another meta program, doesn't it? Even one we didn't mention. And never had this before, so it's new, sorting for difference. And they say, and I'm thinking about this and this, and I'm looking to the future. Time frame? Future. Very simple to get this information. And the last one on the page, and certainly not the least, something called scope. Scope is always sensory-based. Scope is the amount of time and or space that's under consideration. Now, in the old NLP, this used to be considered chunk size. But as we're going to find out, chunk size is an ambiguous term. What we want to find out is what is the size of the context the person is considering. I know that's very amorphous phrasing, so let me offer some more here. There is, first of all, you'll notice the middle term, natural chunk size. This is from cognitive linguistics, and this was not around when NLP started, that there are a natural size of things which people respond to. A chair, a jacket, a pen of a sort, a carpet. These we have a single noun for them. We would consider them a natural chunk size, a car. Now, you take the car example, and you want to go smaller in the car. You want to scope down, like you're turning one of those lenses. So you get closer and closer to the car, then you would be seeing perhaps the wheel. Maybe you'd be seeing the little air escape gauge, the air piece to let the air in and out. Scope is like a microscope, a telescope. It's like a zoom lens. That's scope. And so when you're asking the person about the decision, you want to know, are they using a natural level scope? In other words, they want to buy a car, a house, they want to find a place to go on vacation, something like that. It'd be natural size, because we have a word for it. Now, when you move into some more detail of it, some little detail of it, then we might use, they have a smaller scope. We would even say they're detail-oriented. So somebody there, I used to be in the antique business, as you might have gathered from a carpenter and stonemason and cabinet maker. I forgot I was also an antique dealer. And, well, I didn't forget. I just didn't mention it before. And when I was an antique dealer, I used to refinish stuff. I'm very good at repairing antiques. That's why I made the transition to custom cabinet maker. And people would come into the shop, and we'd show them something. And we had one, I remember this distinctly, this beautiful round table. And there was a nick on the back here. And so we had to price it a bit lower. And some people would come into the shop, and I would feel obligated to show them the nick. Because, you know, it's turned away. It's if we were hiding it. We didn't want that. But if we turned it forward, then, of course, they'd only see the nick. But we wanted to show them was really, if you put it in a corner or towards a wall, you'd never see it. And so this couple came in. They may be married now. And they're looking at the table together, and they're going, oh, that would really work well. You know, no, I can't believe that. You know, and then I said, well, I said, you like it? He said, oh, that's a very good price. I said, well, it's just got a nick on the back. Oh. Well, I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. We'll come back later. You know, and there was a sense from that. I mean, it's like the detail orientation. They couldn't do it, even though table, natural chunk size, good table, good condition, beautiful. Detail didn't fit. Now, that's what I'm talking about. Somebody who crosses the T's and dots the I's. You know, somebody who looks around a car that they want to buy, they're going to buy a used car, and it's in beautiful shape, and it's got low mileage, but it's got a little scratch on the lower leg. Yeah, and they can't do it, you know. Now, it's not only they can't do it. I'm just giving you ways of realizing that some of you may be more detailed. We find out this, there's another way to find this out, by the way. It's called submodalities. Steve Andreas, as a college kid, was trained in color chemistry. When he found out about submodalities, it was the proverbial duck in water. Other people were going, what do you mean the color of my pictures? What do you mean two-dimensional or three-dimensional? And they're like, I don't know what, and Steve's going, oh, this is great, you know, because it's details of experience. Now, other people have a tendency, again, these are tendencies, leanings, the big picture. Now, careful, when I mean the big picture with scope, I mean sensory-based. I mean the big picture. The same scene, cinematic. So when somebody tells you, but what about the planet? They're seeing in their mind the planet. Now, you can be a big scope without that, or a general scope without doing it that way. But the point is, you're taking in a whole lot of space or time. You see, you can also scope in terms of, well, if I make this decision and I take that job, and then my partner's going to move there, and then this is going to happen, and they might scope out 2 years while making the decision. It's also strategic planning.
But I did, like when I was younger, I wanted to box, and then I saw myself way in the future as a wash house, so I had to box. I went that far into the future.
Yeah. Now, I actually, having worked in a hospital as well, in the orthopedic recovery, wish that more young people who had decided that motorcycles were part of their youth had had that strategy, if only to be more careful, because I had a motorcycle in college for a while too. But, you know, if I had had a couple of drinks, I didn't get on it. You know, because I projected out into the future that, you know, that I'd taken care of enough people whose hands were here. That, yeah, that's a compelling experience. That I realized that, you know, I thought about riding my bike, which I loved. I had a Triumph, a 500. It threw oil all over my jeans. I ruined probably a dozen pairs of jeans that summer. But I loved it. But if I'd had a couple of drinks, no. Because I would go out in the future, and I might not be, and I knew it wouldn't even be me. It would be some other driver, and I wouldn't have every bit of reaction time with me to avert whatever this other person would do. Of course, I would drive well. It's a meta program. And, no, and in that, then, I didn't ride it unless I was safe. And you, in a sense, looked out there and thought, the costs of coming into this part of that aren't worth doing the trip. Yeah. And it's not that you shouldn't do the trip, but that's about using time. Now, Connie Ray Andreas does the same thing about eating. She'll see something on the plate now. She'll wonder about what it would be like in her stomach now, and she'll wonder about it 3 hours. She'll wonder about it the next day. It doesn't mean she doesn't eat. It actually means that she eats in a way that she says, what's going to energize me? What's going to keep me going? What's going to help me? So again, how scope can be very useful.
Yeah, it's not about now for her, it's about the future.
Right. And keeping in mind for some people, very appropriately, it is about now, you know, or about a close now, or about maintaining the past. I realize I give a lot of future examples, so I don't want to prejudice the sense that each of these time frames can be very useful in terms of whatever the decision is being made. Okay. So, as we look at our sheets, we see we have these number of possibilities. We have the content, we have the perceptual position, we have the attention direction, we have the time frame, and we have the scope. Scope up there. Now, there are other meta programs. Remind you, we will get to other meta programs for motivation, and we'll get to other meta programs for conviction. These are interrelated. We keep cycling through these in our own way. So you're going, well, wait, there's other things in a decision. I like that. Did you hear that? I'll do that again. Wait, there's other things in decision. Ambiguity. I love it. So this is not all, but this is where we start. So you can move forward if you'd like a couple of pages, and you will find an elicitation form. And the elicitation form has some of the questions that Ross Stewart and Roger Bailey worked out, and also has no questions, because you just got to pay attention. So the question asked there to begin the whole thing is, tell me about a significant, and then you can set the context. Tell me about a significant work decision, relationship decision, leisure decision, learning decision. In other words, you set the context that you're interested in. Now, allow me to invite the person who sits in this seat, that is the explorer, to pick the context, because then they can find out more. This could be very educational, because as you know by now, these are going by all the time whether you plan to do them or not. So you might want to find out more about your relationship decisions. You might want to find out more about your work decisions, more about your career decisions, more about why it is you come up to the mountains and take courses decision. And keeping in mind that you're looking here on the form and it says people, thing, activity, information, and you could put little hash marks next to it you wanted, you could circle it if you wanted, you could even write down some of the words the person uses that indicate that. This is a learning tool. Or you could do that on separate paper. Keep in mind that while they're answering that question, what are they doing? They're answering all the other ones, right? They're doing all the other meta programs, some in the foreground, some in the background. So, in case you didn't get it on the first round, which is one of the reasons you'll have a partner, do this in threes, you can ask for the perceptual position, tell me about, same context, whatever it is, that decision that gave you trouble. Now, why would we use that gave you trouble? Well, we know from Virginia Satir and her work, you know about the Satir patterns, the Satir categories. The Satir categories are that under stress, people will revert to their most practiced patterns, right? So if you really want to find out which part of the pie the person is using most, then ask them about a difficult decision because they'll go to the one they use most prominently. The other choices of the specialist will fall away. So if you're trying to find out how the person typically does it, now remember, you probably got the answer in the response to, tell me about a significant work decision. And you said, well, I was blah, 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 and then you got it in those, I, yous, and so forth. But if you didn't get it, and you're very interested in what the person will most likely do, then say, well, what about a work thing that gave you difficulty? And they will answer pretty directly. During this, you can also notice where are they placing their attention. Is it how they felt in the situation or what they thought in the situation? Was it they were looking to what they could do in the situation? Or were they wondering what they did before in the situation? You get the attention direction by the use of the verb, to be, past, present, future. You'll get the time frame. And of course, by then you'll realize, well, are they in the details? Or some people refer to it as the minutia. Of course, who would refer to it as the minutia? No, detailed people would not call it minutia. They would call it the important part. They would quote Mies van der Rohe and say, God is in the details. Because details are good. Yeah, people who, not big, general. Yeah, people who have a more general scope would go, oh, that's just the details. It doesn't matter. Yes, we have attitudes about people that do it different ways. Now, I'm wondering whether a demonstration is needed or not, because I think it's pretty explanatory. This is the same exercise you did this morning, only now you're going to do it about a decision. Threes again, write some stuff down, kibitz between each other, and switch around. Are you ready? You realize I'm asking for a decision. Let's go.